Good morning! Happy Mondays with Mark here at Green Bay Botanical Garden. Mark Conlock, Director of Horticulture here at the garden. And it is a chilly day. It is kind of cold, rainy, a little bit, I don't know what you want to say. It's kind of invigorating, but I'm not sure if I'd really go that nicely about it. So what I wanted to talk to you all about today is when is the right time to plant things? Because I know a lot of people are anxious to plant because in Wisconsin we have such a short growing season and things are greening up, the grass is green, we see things growing and we're like anxious to get our annuals and vegetables and things like that in the ground. So I want to share with you some resources and some things that we do here at the garden and maybe give you some advice on what to do in your own growing space. So first thing, remember from last year, Month by Month Gardening in Wisconsin by Melinda Myers. The Bible of month-to-month gardening. This book was published in 2001, at least my guy here. But I wanted to show you something. Like in the back of this book, it has a bunch of cool information. And the average last frost date in our part of Wisconsin is kind of around May 10 through 16. So that's something to think about when you're planting because, you know, a lot of plants don't like to be below freezing. That's not going to be good for annuals and vegetables, a lot of them. So you really have to remember that we're not quite there yet. And then the other interesting part about this other chart here shows you the first frost date. So it gets you an idea, you know, in Brown County here, we're kind of like in October 4th through 10th. So that, you know, gives you an idea of the length of our growing season. But that, remember, is the air temperature, and a lot of plant growth is related to soil temperature. So you might want to invest in a soil thermometer because even though the air is warm, it might not be good for growing in the ground because the soil might be cold still. So, you know, pretty much we have June, July, August, part of September, October, 120 plus-ish days maybe for growing stuff. So in Melinda's book here, in the UW Extension, has this pretty cool guideline here for vegetables of when to plant them. So you can see some of the things that you could consider planting now that can take a little bit of cold. Oh, my things are blowing away in this weather. But you can see some of like leafy vegetable crops and root crops are things that you can start growing. So here at the garden, you know, we oftentimes start lettuce early and we use that in our spring containers and you can plant that into your garden. And if Rachel goes back here, she can show you some like cabbage and kale and cool season cold crops that we planted. But even some of those guys weren't so happy coming out of our, you know, kind of hardened off greenhouse environment into the colder temperatures. So you could also seed radishes, spinach, kohlrabi and things like that. But, you know, warm season crops, solanaceae crops like eggplants, tomatoes, and peppers, you definitely don't want to buy those even though you might see them out for sale. You don't want to plant those yet because they cannot take the cold and they also don't grow very well in cool soil temperatures. So you have to wait on all that stuff. You could start them as a little seed inside your house and start growing them on so they're ready to roll when it gets warmer, but don't plant them outside yet. And then for those of us who are all into the flowers, this book also has some interesting information kind of on different annual crops. And it lists to the far right side there kind of like they're hardy, maybe partially hardy, or tender crops. So that gives you an idea of annuals that you can start. So typically the things that you start seeing for sale, you know, are like pansies like this guy here, alyssums, which have a very beautiful fragrance. We have some of the snapdragons you can see that we planted, but they got a little bit taken back by the cold. And the other one that I think of as a big seller is the petunias, which are pretty hardy. You can see in this book of Melinda's, they were like listed as kind of, you know, not as hardy as some of these other guys, but they're ones that we have outside in our greenhouse area at the garden that we're starting to harden off and get ready. So those are some references and some things that you can think about looking at of how to start plants. And what plants you can grow right now and plant, but not too many. But perennials, trees, and shrubs, remember, that are in our area, they're already growing in all the bulbs because they're used to our climate and they're adapted and they can take those cold up and downs. So they're not anything you need to really worry about or cover or do anything to. The flower bud is the least hardy part above ground of a plant, so those will get damaged first. The other thing I wanted to share with you, I gotta go on my phone. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about growing degree days. that's something we're starting to do a little bit here at the garden more. So this is from the American Public Garden Association's webpage. They have some really interesting information kind of about what it is. But in essence, it's a high temperature minus a low temperature, and then subtract 50, because most plants and insects need at least 50 degrees before they're actively growing. So with our crazy temperatures and climate change and everything going up and down and not being so normal, some books and things like this might not be as applicable, you know, as the temperatures are so fluctuating. So we might want to look at a more scientific growing degree day methodology of when to do things. So a lot of universities have information about it. So for example, Penn State has like a great article about kind of calculating that growing degree days, like I said, and then you just add them up throughout the growing season to accumulate them, and different things happen as those growing degree days accumulate. So another place, Illinois, I don't know why Wisconsin doesn't have one of these, but this tells you the growing degree days, you know, that have been calculated so far in Wisconsin and Illinois. And you can see, you can compare that right now. It says we're around maybe 100-ish growing degree days. And last year, this little chart shows you that we had like 2,700 growing degree days. So we're only like 1/27th of the way into the season. Then my final website to show you is, the Ohio State University, Ohio Buckeyes. Their mascot is literally a nut. This has some interesting information, like you can type in your county or a city, and it tells you kind of what is happening around those growing degree days that have accumulated so far. So like this guy shows you that this beetle is starting to emerge. So that's how you can use growing degree days, you know, to look into different pests and insect diseases and start to time and be ready to look out for those things. So the growing degree days is kind of a more scientific way to think about, you know, when you're planting things and when you're doing any treatments on insects and disease, so that you're not wasting your time and wasting chemicals and things like that when you're treating different, you know, pest and disease organisms, and you know what to look for when, so that you're not wasting your time either. So those are just a couple of tips of things you can do while it's too cold to be able to go out there and be planting and to be prepared for what's coming up as we start to warm up.
Melissa has a question. She knows this is a little bit off topic, but she's interested when the tulips here are going to be in bloom.
Oh, that is a great question. I love that. That kind of ties into my growing degree day thing, actually. I think I can make that work. Typically, our bulbs here, the tulips, peak around the middle of May and Mother's Day. And we do that kind of on purpose to time with Mother's Day and some of the other events that we have going on here. And I think what happens is they normally do peak that time because of them being the kind of mid-late bloomers. All of our fluctuations of up and downs of temperatures, those growing degree days probably accumulate the right way, even though it gets, you know, sporadically roller coastery temperatures. So they do still typically peak around the middle of May. And if you look around here, you can start to see just the coloring up of a few of these tulips, like in the Schneider Terrace back here and throughout the gardens. I've seen a couple starting to come on, so I think we'll be pretty close to on schedule with that.
Okay.
Yep. So anyway, keep posted, check out our Facebook and our website, and Rachel will be updating it with the peak of glory of when you should come out here to see all those tulips in bloom and everything else. And have a great day.